The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale air. I sat in the front row, my hands folded in my lap, watching my daughter and son-in-law confer with their attorney at the opposite table. They hadn't looked at me once since we'd arrived. The petition before Judge Catherine Reeves was straightforward, at least on paper. My daughter Nicole and her husband Derek were requesting full conservatorship over my person and estate, claiming I had become mentally incompetent and could no longer manage my own affairs. I was 68 years old, a retired systems analyst, and apparently, according to the documentation they'd filed, suffering from severe cognitive decline that rendered me incapable of basic decision-making. The irony was almost amusing. Almost. Before we go further into what happened that day, I want to ask you something. If you're watching this story right now, please take just a moment to subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. It really helps this channel grow, and I read every single comment. Now, back to the courtroom. My name is Margaret Chen. For 42 years, I worked in systems analysis and data architecture for financial institutions. I helped build the fraud detection systems that 3 major banks still use today. I retired 5 years ago with a comfortable pension, substantial savings, and a paid-off home in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland, Oregon. I had one child, Nicole. I'd raised her alone after my husband died when she was 7. I'd worked extra hours, saved carefully, put her through college without loans, and helped with the down payment on her first home. When she married Derek 8 years ago, I'd even contributed significantly to their wedding, though I'd noticed even then that Derek had expensive tastes and vague employment history. But children grow up. They make their own choices. I'd stayed supportive, attending family dinners, babysitting my 2 grandchildren when asked, sending generous gifts at birthdays and holidays. I thought we had a good relationship, if not particularly close. 3 months ago, everything changed. It started with small things. Nicole calling more frequently, asking detailed questions about my daily routine. Was I eating properly? Was I taking my medications? Did I need help managing my bills? I'd found the attention odd, but not alarming. I lived independently, maintained my home, volunteered at the library twice a week, and managed my own finances with the same precision I'd applied to my career. My health was good. I took medication for high blood pressure and cholesterol, the same as millions of people my age, but I was mentally sharp and physically active. Then came the doctor's appointments Nicole insisted on scheduling. She'd wanted to accompany me, which I'd declined. I was perfectly capable of speaking with my physician alone. But she'd persisted, claiming she was worried, that I seemed confused lately, that I'd repeated myself in conversations. None of it was true, but she'd said it with such concern in her voice that I'd started to question myself. Had I repeated stories? Was I forgetting things? I began keeping notes, detailed notes, every conversation, every phone call, every interaction. It was an old habit from my professional life, documentation and verification. The notes revealed a pattern that troubled me deeply. Nicole was creating a narrative, a false one. 6 weeks ago, she and Derek had invited me to dinner. Over dessert, they'd suggested I consider moving into an assisted living facility. For my own safety, they'd said. They'd even toured several places and brought brochures. I'd declined, politely but firmly. I was perfectly capable of living independently. The next week, Nicole had arrived unannounced with Derek and someone she introduced as a geriatric care specialist. The woman had asked me intrusive questions about my daily routine, my finances, my medical history. I'd asked her to leave. 2 weeks after that, I'd received the court summons. Now I sat in this courtroom, listening to Nicole's attorney paint a picture of a confused, declining woman who couldn't remember to pay bills, who left the stove on, who wandered the neighborhood disoriented. None of it was true, but he presented it with practiced sincerity, backed by affidavits from witnesses I'd never met and medical opinions from doctors I'd never seen. Judge Reeves looked tired as she reviewed the thick stack of documents. She was probably in her early 50s, gray threading through her dark hair, reading glasses perched on her nose. She'd heard dozens of these cases, I imagined. Families seeking control over elderly relatives, sometimes for protection, sometimes for less noble reasons. The judge looked up at me. "Mrs. Chen, do you understand why you're here today?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, my voice steady. "My daughter and son-in-law are petitioning for conservatorship over my person and estate. They claim I'm mentally incompetent." "And what is your response to their petition?" "I oppose it completely. I am fully competent to manage my own affairs." Nicole's attorney stood. "Your Honor, if I may, Mrs. Chen's denial of her condition is itself evidence of her impairment. It's common for individuals experiencing cognitive decline to lack insight into their own limitations." It was a neat trap. Deny the accusation, and the denial becomes evidence of the accusation itself. Judge Reeves set down her papers. "I've reviewed the submitted documentation. The medical evaluations are concerning, though I note Mrs. Chen was not present for most of the assessments cited." "Mrs. Chen refused to cooperate with the evaluation process," the attorney interjected smoothly, "because the evaluations were requested by my daughter without my consent or knowledge," I said calmly. "I was never informed I was being assessed. I have my own physician who can attest to my mental competency." The judge looked interested. "Do you have documentation from your physician?" "Yes, Your Honor. I brought copies of my recent medical records, including a cognitive assessment completed last week, specifically in response to this petition." I stood and approached the bench, handing the clerk a folder. Inside were comprehensive medical records, including a full neurological evaluation that showed normal cognitive function for my age, along with a letter from my physician of 15 years stating clearly that I showed no signs of dementia, confusion, or impairment. Nicole's attorney paled slightly as the judge reviewed the documents. "These are quite different from the assessments provided in your petition, Counselor," Judge Reeves observed, her tone sharpening. "Your Honor, Mrs. Chen may have been coached or may have been experiencing a moment of clarity. Or," the judge interrupted, "your clients may have presented selective and potentially misleading evidence to this court." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Judge Reeves removed her glasses, fixing Nicole and Derek with a steady gaze. "I'm going to ask Mrs. Chen some questions directly. Answer truthfully and to the best of your ability, please." "Of course, Your Honor. Can you tell me your full legal name and date of birth?" "Margaret Elizabeth Chen, born April 14th, 1955. "Your current address?" I recited it without hesitation. "Can you explain what you did for a living before retirement?" I provided a concise summary of my career in systems analysis, including specific projects and the institutions I'd worked for. The judge continued with questions about current events, recent meals, medication schedules. I answered each one clearly and accurately. There was no confusion, no hesitation, no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever. Finally, Judge Reeves leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Chen, the petition before me claims you're unable to manage your financial affairs. It alleges you've made poor financial decisions, forgotten to pay bills, and generally become unable to handle your own money. How do you respond?" It's completely false, Your Honor. I maintain detailed financial records. I balance my accounts monthly. All my bills are paid on time, and I've never missed a payment or experienced any financial difficulty. Can you prove that? Yes. I brought 6 months of bank statements, utility bills, and credit card statements, all showing timely payments and careful management. I handed another folder to the clerk. The judge spent several minutes reviewing the documents, her expression growing increasingly skeptical of the petition before her. These records appear quite organized and thorough, she noted. Nicole's attorney tried to recover. Your Honor, with respect, anyone can bring documents to court. The real question is whether Mrs. Chen can function in daily life without assistance, whether she understands complex financial matters, whether... Counselor, Judge Reeves interrupted, a note of warning in her voice. I've been doing this for 23 years. I know what cognitive decline looks like. I also know what a competent person looks like. She turned back to me. Mrs. Chen, I'm going to ask you something unusual, but I want to see how you respond. Can you recite your bank account numbers from memory? The courtroom went silent. It was an odd request, but I understood immediately what she was testing. Memory, yes, but also organizational thinking and mental processing. Most people couldn't recite their account numbers without looking them up. I'm not most people. I maintain accounts at 3 financial institutions, Your Honor. My primary checking account at Columbia Bank, account number 4372-8891-2246-7103. My savings account at the same institution, account number 4372-5529-8847-2095. My investment account at Vanguard, account number 21783556. My secondary checking account at First National, which I use for bill payments, account number 884729-31667, and a high-yield savings account at Marcus, account number 8832-4411-7296. I recited each one without pause, without error, without even needing to think about it. Decades of working with financial systems had given me an unusual facility with numbers. Judge Reeves wrote them down, then looked at me with what might have been the beginning of a smile. And can you tell me the approximate balances in each account as of this week? The Columbia checking account has approximately $42,000. The savings account, $178,000. The Vanguard account is currently valued at approximately $1.2 million. The First National checking account maintains a balance of around $15,000 for bill payments, and the Marcus account has approximately $230,000. The judge's eyebrows rose. Nicole and Derek were staring at me, their faces frozen in shock. That's a substantial estate, Mrs. Chen. Yes, Your Honor. I worked for over 4 decades and saved carefully. And you manage all of these accounts yourself? I do. I review all statements monthly, rebalance my investment portfolio quarterly, and maintain detailed records of all transactions. Judge Reeves set down her pen and looked directly at Nicole and Derek. Would either of you like to tell me why you failed to mention the full extent of your mother's estate in your petition? Nicole's attorney jumped in. Your Honor, the petition focuses on Mrs. Chen's competency, not the specific value. The petition claims she's incapable of managing her finances and needs a conservator. Yet you've presented a court with incomplete financial information about an estate worth over $1.5 million. The judge's voice was cold now. That's either incompetent lawyering or deliberate deception. Which is it? No one answered. Let me ask a different question, Judge Reeves continued. Mrs. Chen, has anyone pressured you to give them access to your accounts, to add them as signatories, or to transfer assets to them? I'd been waiting for this question. I pulled out another folder from my bag. Yes, Your Honor. Over the past 3 months, my daughter and son-in-law have made numerous requests for access to my accounts. I have copies of emails, text messages, and recordings of phone conversations where they've pressured me to add Derek as a joint account holder, to make Nicole my power of attorney, and to transfer my home into a family trust they would control. I handed the folder to the clerk. Inside were printed emails, text message screenshots, and transcripts of recorded calls. Oregon is a one-party consent state for recording conversations, so everything I'd documented was legal. The judge reviewed the evidence in silence. Nicole and Derek were whispering urgently with their attorney, who looked increasingly distressed. One email in particular was damning. Derek had written, "Margaret, you're not getting any younger. It makes sense to get these assets protected now before anything happens to you. Once the conservatorship is in place, we can manage everything properly." He'd sent that email 2 weeks before they filed the petition. Judge Reeves looked up, her face carefully neutral. "This email suggests your son-in-law was discussing conservatorship as a strategy for accessing your assets before any competency evaluation took place." Nicole's attorney stood. "Your Honor, I was not aware of that communication. My clients informed me they were concerned about Mrs. Chen's welfare." "Your clients appear to have been more concerned about Mrs. Chen's bank accounts," the judge said flatly. She turned back to me. "Mrs. Chen, do you have any other evidence you'd like to present?" "Yes, Your Honor. I hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago when the frequency and nature of these requests became suspicious." I produced another folder. This one contained financial records showing that Derek and Nicole were in significant debt, credit card balances totaling over $80,000, a second mortgage on their home, a car lease they were behind on, documentation of Derek's failed business ventures that had consumed their savings. The investigator also discovered that my daughter and son-in-law consulted with an estate attorney about challenging my will before they filed for conservatorship. They were told a will contest would be difficult without evidence of incapacity. Shortly after that consultation, they began building this case against me. The evidence was overwhelming. Phone records showing Derek had called multiple attorneys shopping for one who would take the case. Browser history from a computer forensics expert showing searches for how to prove incompetence and getting conservatorship of elderly parent. Judge Reeves spent a long time reviewing everything. The courtroom was absolutely silent except for the rustle of papers. Finally, she looked up. "I'm denying this petition in its entirety," she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Not only has the petitioner failed to demonstrate that Mrs. Chen is incompetent, but the evidence suggests this petition was filed in bad faith as a means of accessing her assets without her consent." Nicole started to cry. Derek's face had gone dark red. "Furthermore," Judge Reeves continued, "I'm concerned that Mrs. Chen may need protection from her own family members. Mrs. Chen, do you wish to file for a restraining order?" I'd thought about this carefully. "Not at this time, Your Honor, but I would like the court's findings entered into the permanent record so that any future attempts to question my competency can be evaluated in light of today's proceedings." "Granted. I'm also ordering that copies of all evidence presented today be preserved by the court and made available to Mrs. Chen's attorney of record." She fixed Nicole and Derek with a stern look. "I strongly suggest you both consider the implications of what you've attempted here. Conservatorship abuse is a serious matter. If Mrs. Chen chose to file civil charges for attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, she would have substantial evidence to support such a claim." She paused, letting that sink in. "This hearing is concluded. "Mrs. Chen, you are free to go." I stood, gathered my documents, and walked out of the courtroom. I didn't look at Nicole or Derek. There was nothing left to say to them. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm. I sat on a bench near the courthouse entrance, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the hearing was fading, leaving behind the weight of what had happened. My daughter had tried to have me declared incompetent so she could steal my assets, my own child. A few minutes later, my attorney joined me. Patricia Wu had been recommended by a colleague from my banking days. She specialized in elder law and had guided me through the preparation for today's hearing. "That was exceptional," Patricia said, sitting beside me. "I've never seen someone recite their account numbers from memory in court. The judge was impressed." I just answered honestly. "You did more than that. You were prepared, organized, and credible. Everything their case wasn't." She handed me a folder. "These are copies of the court's findings. I'd also like to discuss next steps. You mentioned you don't want a restraining order right now, but I'd strongly recommend we at least send a formal cease and desist letter to Nicole and Derek, making it clear that any further attempts to access your finances or interfere with your autonomy will result in legal action." Agreed. I'd also suggest reviewing your estate planning documents. Make sure your will is current, establish clear directives about who should and shouldn't have any authority if you ever do need assistance, and consider setting up a revocable trust with an independent trustee. We discussed logistics for another 20 minutes. Patricia was thorough and professional, and I was grateful for her guidance. When she left, I sat alone on the bench for a while longer, watching people come and go from the courthouse. My phone buzzed, a text message from Nicole. "Mom, please, we need to talk. This was all a misunderstanding." I deleted it without responding. Another message came through, this one from Derek. "You're being unreasonable. We were trying to help you. Now you've embarrassed the whole family." I blocked his number. The following days were quiet. I returned to my routine, my volunteering, my life. But I couldn't ignore the larger question that lingered. What happens next? I spent that evening going through every piece of my estate planning. My will, drafted 5 years ago, left everything to Nicole. It was straightforward, standard, and now completely inappropriate. I called Patricia the next morning. "I want to change my will," I said, "and I want to make sure it's absolutely bulletproof." We met at her office that afternoon. Over the course of 3 hours, we drafted a new estate plan. The bulk of my assets would go to a charitable trust I was establishing, focused on financial literacy programs for low-income families. A smaller portion would create education funds for my 2 grandchildren, accessible only when they turned 25 and administered by an independent trustee. Nicole and Derek would receive nothing. "Are you certain about this?" Patricia asked gently. "It's not my place to judge, but disinheriting your only child is a significant decision." "I'm certain. She tried to have me declared incompetent so she could control my money. I won't reward that betrayal." "Then we'll make sure this will is ironclad. We'll include a detailed explanation of your reasoning, cognitive assessments confirming your competency at the time of drafting, and a no-contest clause stating that anyone who challenges the will forfeits even the token bequest I'd suggest including." "What token bequest?" $1 to Nicole specifically. It proves you didn't forget her. You deliberately chose to leave her nothing. I signed the new will 2 weeks later, with 3 witnesses present and a videotaped statement explaining my decisions in my own words. 3 months passed. I heard nothing from Nicole or Derek. No apologies, no attempts at reconciliation, just silence. Then My grandson called. Tyler was 16, and we'd always had a good relationship. Grandma, I don't know what happened between you and Mom, but I wanted you to know I don't think you're crazy or anything. Dad told us we shouldn't talk to you anymore, but that's not right. My heart ached. Thank you, Tyler. That means more than you know. Mom's been really stressed. They're fighting about money all the time. Dad keeps saying they wouldn't have these problems if you'd just been reasonable. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this. It's okay. I just wanted you to know I love you. After we hung up, I cried for the first time since the hearing, not for Nicole or Derek, but for my grandchildren who'd been caught in their parents' greed and manipulation. 6 months after the court hearing, I received a call from Patricia. Margaret, I wanted to inform you that Nicole filed a complaint with Adult Protective Services, claiming you're being financially exploited by me and that I unduly influenced you to change your will. I wasn't surprised. What happens now? APS will investigate. They'll interview you, review your medical records, and evaluate whether there's any merit to the claim. Given what happened in court, I don't anticipate any issues, but you should be prepared for the process. The investigation took 3 weeks. A social worker visited my home, interviewed my doctor, reviewed my financial records, and spent 2 hours talking with me about my decisions and my mental state. Her report concluded that I was fully competent, that my financial management was exemplary, and that there was no evidence of exploitation or undue influence. The complaint was dismissed, and APS noted in their file that this appeared to be a retaliatory action by a family member who had been denied access to my assets. Nicole tried twice more, once with a complaint to the State Bar Association against Patricia, claiming she had manipulated an elderly client. That complaint was also dismissed, and once with a petition to the probate court requesting an evaluation of my competency, claiming I'd changed my will due to diminished capacity. Judge Reeves, by chance assigned to that petition as well, reviewed it for approximately 5 minutes before denying it with prejudice and warning Nicole's new attorney that any further frivolous filings would result in sanctions. I continued living my life. I traveled, spending a month in Japan and 2 weeks in New Zealand. I deepened my volunteer work at the library, eventually joining their board. I took classes, learning pottery and photography. I made new friends through a hiking group and reconnected with old colleagues from my banking days. On my 70th birthday, I hosted a small party at my home. Patricia came, along with several friends from the library and my hiking group. Tyler and his younger sister Emma attended, despite their parents' disapproval. We ate cake, shared stories, and celebrated the simple joy of autonomy and freedom. Tyler pulled me aside at one point. Dad said you cut Mom out of your will. I did. Because of what they tried to do? Yes. He nodded slowly. Emma and I talked about it. We understand. What they did was wrong. I've made sure you and your sister will be taken care of, I said gently. There are education funds being established for both of you, but they'll be managed independently, and your parents won't have access to them. That's fair. He hugged me. I'm glad you fought back, Grandma. I'm glad you didn't let them win. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had happened. Nicole had tried to steal my autonomy, my assets, my dignity. She'd lied to courts, filed false complaints, and attempted to paint me as incompetent and helpless. She'd done it for money, for her own financial convenience, with no regard for what it would cost me emotionally or practically. But I'd prepared. I'd documented. I'd stayed calm and strategic, using the same analytical skills I'd honed over 4 decades of professional work. I'd proven my competency beyond any doubt and protected my assets from exploitation. The revenge wasn't dramatic or confrontational. It was quiet and absolute. Nicole had lost access to everything she'd tried to steal. Her attempts to manipulate the legal system had created a permanent record of her bad faith. Her relationship with her children was strained because they could see clearly what she'd tried to do. And I'd moved forward, building a life defined by my own choices rather than anyone else's limitations or expectations. 3 years have passed now since that day in court. I'm 71, healthy, active, and still completely independent. The charitable trust I established is funding financial literacy programs in 3 cities. Tyler graduated high school and used his education fund to attend college. Emma is thriving in her junior year. Nicole sent a letter last Christmas. It was formal, carefully worded, probably drafted with legal advice. She apologized for the misunderstanding and suggested we move past this difficult period. I didn't respond. Some betrayals can't be undone. Some relationships can't be repaired. Not because I'm unforgiving, but because trust, once completely shattered, can't be rebuilt on the same foundation. I learned something important through this experience. Being older doesn't mean being vulnerable. Having family doesn't mean surrendering your autonomy. And fighting back against exploitation doesn't require aggression or confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to be victimized, proving your competency beyond doubt, and living well on your own terms. I'm Margaret Chen. I'm 71 years old. I can recite my bank account numbers from memory. And nobody, not even my own daughter, will ever take my independence away from me. That's not stubbornness, that's dignity. And dignity, I've learned, is worth protecting at any cost. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Your support helps us share more stories about standing up for yourself when it matters most. Thank you for listening.